Okay, our next presenter is Jon Snyder from Baylor University. Mr. Jon Snyder is currently pursuing a PhD in church music at Baylor University. He earned a Bachelor of Music in Music Education from Susquehanna University, Master of Church Music in Handbells from Concordia University, Wisconsin, and Master of Music in Choral Conducting from Western Illinois University. He has presented at regional and national conferences on the topics of the goals of church choirs, language in choral music, and historical works from 20th century England. And he will be presenting to us musical goal changes during the COVID-19 pandemic, a look at repertoire and rehearsals. Again, we will have 20 minutes here, and I will ring the bell at 5 and 1 minute, and we will have discussion following. So everyone, you can feel free to type in the chat box. Let's welcome Mr. Snyder.
Thank you very much. Over the past year, musicians have asked, how do we keep singing during a pandemic? At first, the idea of singing and gathering transmitting a virus shocked the United States and our entire choral infrastructure. After the shock wore off, we entered a time of grief, asking how we could physically sing together safely. Mark Banger writes that a suspension of communal singing wounds souls. So epidemiologists and directors worked together to mend these wounded souls as many longed for a return to normalcy. Now, over a year into the pandemic, it is time to reflect not only on how to continue singing, but also why. I used my time with the Baylor University Concert Choir to investigate this question of why we continue to sing. The Baylor Concert Choir ceased all activities in the spring of 2020. Upon returning to campus in the fall, the choir held 2 weeks of rehearsal online before meeting in person in a church sanctuary adjacent to campus. The choir repeated this process in the spring of 2021. I acted as a participant observer within the choir for both semesters under study. As a graduate student, I functioned as a section leader and assistant conductor. The choir rehearsed 3 times weekly for 75 minutes each. The director, Dr. Lynn Gackel, and the other graduate students seen here, Will McLean and Jenna Hernandez, and myself, would often meet after rehearsal to discuss how it went and the next rehearsal's plans. This discussion allowed for more profound insight into the director's planning. I also had informal interviews with several students and one formal interview with Gackel. Through communication, observation, and participation, I gathered insights into why we continue to sing during the first global pandemic in a century. It is important to establish goals for the semester or year with any ensemble before planning rehearsal or repertoire. Whether in a pandemic or not, the advice of Meg Davies rings true. Quote, always evaluate what your purpose is, prioritize your goals, and find the best methodology for achieving those. Rebecca Lord wrote 3 questions to help begin the planning process. What are the top priorities for my choir during the pandemic? What resources do I have access to? And what are the hurdles? With these questions answered, directors can make more realistic choices about repertoire. I emphasize realistic because even the most accomplished or experienced director can easily overprogram in new circumstances. Diane Beckham-Menaker agrees. If you don't shift your goals, you will feel like you have failed, and you haven't. Accurate and achievable objectives make a more productive time together, and a more enjoyable one too. Gackel understood all of this in creating her repertoire list for the fall and spring. When asked about her primary goal for the fall, she said that she, quote, wanted to fill the void left by not being able to make music, especially for our Baylor students who had to cease their music making last spring, end quote. She understood the grief that many felt over losing the 2020 spring semester, including a spring concert following the high of performing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The music that Gackle selected fit into two major themes. In the fall, she wanted to find music that would uplift and remind us of why we sing together. Speaking directly to that idea, Gackle included You Do Not Walk Alone, Here, and In Meeting We Are Blessed. All three focus on themes of gathering, togetherness, and unity. In Paradisum was a newly composed piece that Stroop wrote over the summer to allow for various in-person or virtual settings. Gackle programmed I Dream a World in the wake of racially charged summer of 2020. These last two came about from Gackle wanting to include music that, quote, spoke to the emotions born out of the feelings during the pandemic and during a very contentious time within our country, end quote. In the spring, the theme shifted to theme times and ways to sing, including in times of praise, sorrow, joy, for love, and for unity. All of the texts selected in the spring reference singing at least once, except for Norwegian Alleluia, which uses Alleluia as its only text. Some works approach song from a sacred response to the gospel, while others see music poetically from the secular. One final note on the selected repertoire is the difficulty level, which was generally lower than in previous semesters. Lord's advice is to choose satisfying repertoire that is doable with the current challenges. Gackle considered this factor consciously in her selection. She later acknowledged, quote, the music was not the most difficult that we have done in the past, but my goals were to choose music which would touch the heart. From September 4th, 2020. The ensemble had been meeting for 2 weeks now. Today was the final day for meeting online, with an anticipation building for the first in-person gathering the following Monday. We began with Gackle introducing Ivo Antognini's Canticum Novum. Gackle used a PowerPoint shared across Zoom with facts about Antognini, the work's form, and a recording. Following the presentation, Joshua Rist, a composer of one of the pieces, joined us. The choir had been working on Here, his piece, for over a week and was familiar with the structure and text. Rist shared some of the work's background, including why it was composed and some of its influences. Following Rist's leaving the meeting, the choir split into 4 breakout rooms, one per section. I led the basses from a small MIDI keyboard plugged into my computer. We sang along with a part track for In Paradisum. Although I could not hear the singers, I could give feedback from my score study and was able to see what students were doing. Gackle's planning of repertoire for the 2 weeks of online learning made effective use of the time. Often directors of all levels feel that there is not enough time within the rehearsal process to explore the historical and poetic setting of selections. Additionally, many rehearsal spaces are not equipped with the audio-visual tools to make the sharing of information via slides or videos easy. Gackle spoke to the adaptation to the online format by saying this. We were also able to delve more into music via Zoom, which I actually liked and hoped that the students did as well. It allowed for recordings and musical textual issues, which were not always as easy to make clear within the rehearsal context. Gackle was able to take a less than ideal rehearsal environment and turn it into a productive time of learning. Following this, composer Joshua Rist joined the ensemble for a presentation and question and answer. Gackle called it an unexpected blessing to explore outside the classroom, which otherwise could not have been readily accomplished. Finally, when we split into breakout rooms, we rehearsed Z. Randall Stroop's In Paradisum. Stroop wrote this work for 2 purposes: to commemorate the lives lost to COVID-19 and give choirs more options in a virtual format. The second, the ability to move online, aligned directly with something Gackle said in our interview. I wanted to seek melody and beauty at any costs. I needed to find music that would transition to online delivery easily and could even be used in a virtual choir format if it came to that. Finding both beauty and virtual applicability at once is difficult enough, but having a text that speaks to the pandemic and the faith that singers possess makes this an excellent selection. And then on September 9th, 2020, on the first day of in-person meeting, there was a buzz in the air. As students made their way to assigned sections within the large sanctuary, each masked and recently tested for COVID-19, they found their seats. After welcoming everyone, Dr. Gackle led the choir in warm-ups, the semester's first choral sounds. She utilized easy warm-ups with a piano, utilizing tools that the returning choir members heard before. Following the warm-up, we rehearsed two pieces, In Meeting We Are Blessed and You Do Not Walk Alone. Despite being hard to hear the other sections, it was a magical moment. It did not matter that there were wrong notes. We were singing in person. The university had coordinated with 7th and James Baptist Church to use their sanctuary and several large rooms for sectionals. Each student had received masks from the university. There were hand sanitizer pumps at each entry into the space. To maximize the amount of time singing together, students waited outside and all entered at once. All of this substantiates Gackle's primary goals for this semester: to make music as safely and as healthfully as possible. Additional options were provided for those students who had been contact traced or felt ill. We held a recurring Zoom call every rehearsal to allow those at home to be part of the learning. Building community is often a focus of any choir, and the pandemic took away much of what was in place before. Gackle commented, "The effect on community was huge. Also, we simply take for granted the human contact element in all that we do, especially in music making. As some singers are on Zoom out of necessity and others are so far apart they cannot hear each other, how are we to build community?" One connection was in the first 5 minutes before students entered the sanctuary. As already noted, leaders admitted students all at once, 5 minutes after class technically began. It allowed each section to talk about academic, personal, and cultural topics. Much like the introduction of information over Zoom, I believe this to be a gain from the extenuating circumstances. Another way to build community is through the repertoire itself. Both selections, looked at in the first face-to-face rehearsal, center around the togetherness brought about in music, community, and worship. In Meeting We Are Blessed speaks of brother and sisterhood in a community of people. The other piece, You Do Not Walk Alone, centers on being in community with both neighbor and God. After not singing together for 6 months, it was impactful to open the year with these texts. We moved to November 18th of 2020. On a warm day in November, we first gathered in the sanctuary where we had been rehearsing for 2 months. We recorded our 2 Christmas pieces during the previous rehearsal in the church in concert attire. But during this rehearsal, we walked over to the Burleson Quadrangle. Our 2 selections had been choreographed with running and basic configurations to create a feeling of movement and excitement in what would otherwise be a stale visual recording in the church. As there would be no audience or Christmas concert, today was our final meeting for the semester. Michael Goad speaks of the silver linings of having no live audience and movable dates for a recorded concert. He writes, quote, "I have also discovered what we can do since we no longer have the same level of performance pressures. The tyranny of the concert is, at least temporarily, gone." With this tyranny of a date gone, when all of the music must be perfected and then quickly put away to move on to the next concert, this situation opens more time to work on other goals, as suggested throughout this paper. The choir did 2 recorded concerts along with the Christmas recordings described. This change in medium impacted the repertoire possibilities, as Gackle explained. The number of concerts and the way that we shared our music became very different, and necessitated some reflection and reassessment on their purpose from my perspective. For the countdown to Christmas, Gackle selected African Noel by Andre Thomas and Still, 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 arranged by Norman Luboff. In both choices, Gackle wanted to encourage students, the Baylor community, and the choral community by being prepared to sing together in whatever format that we would eventually utilize. In reaching out to a broader community, two staples of the choral repertoire did well. Through the entire concert planning, recording, and editing process that I observed, there was an apparent turn from the traditional verbal expressions around the concert. In the times of a pandemic, the focus turned away from the concert and perfection toward one of gratitude for singing together and a community that held one another up through a trying year. Finally, we moved to March 10th of this year. Following the 30 minutes of large group rehearsal in the sanctuary, the choir split into treble and bass voices for a time of sectional work. We began with His Eye is on the Sparrow, a piece in 6/8. Some releases are on beat 5, while others are on beat 6. We drilled this section to ensure that everyone felt an internal pulse and understood where to put the consonants. Schultz's setting of What Wondrous Love, enforces part independence more than almost anything else in the folder. While also reinforcing correct pitches, we focused on moments of unison singing across the two sections. With their moving lines, each section became absorbed in its own pitches, while not looking vertically to see the moments of unison or octaves. After working roughly half the piece, our 20 minutes in sectionals were up, and it was time to return to the sanctuary. Because of the time limitations, singing in one space, even masked, the ensemble had to separate after 30 minutes of full ensemble rehearsal. But due to lesser concert demands this semester, we focused on more precise details and ensured individual learning. Often in full ensemble rehearsals, it is hard to know if each person can do what is asked vocally. By splitting into 2 and sometimes 4 groups, we could hear individuals, small groups, and sections. The same skills could be obtained by those joining the choir via Zoom. Following one rehearsal, Anna, a student, had emailed her observations and lessons learned during the rehearsal. Despite being a first-year college student, Anna understood what we were working on and how it improved over the semester. Another silver lining is that those on Zoom could listen from outside the ensemble instead of always singing from within it. The skill building is happening with those in person, in the sectional rooms, and those who must be remote. It is easy to see that the 2020-2021 year was not typical in any way. However, several goals carried into the year despite being presented differently. We always want our singers to understand the text and find meaning in what they are singing. We're often rushed toward a concert and feel that we do not have enough time to explore the piece's historical and poetic context. But in a 2-week online format, when we can only sing by ourselves and with practice tracks so many times, there are plenty of options for sharing the text. Gackle demonstrated this with slides and recording. Joshua Rist helped students understand his piece by joining us via Zoom, which would not have been feasible otherwise with his residence in Oregon. The musicianship training and vocal skill building in any ensemble often get overlooked for many reasons. By being forced into sectionals, even close to the recording date, we met in these individual and sectional needs. The smaller group learning leads to faster results, which impacts the full group rehearsal in positive ways. Third, community building is an objective that looks the most different from previous semesters while remaining a goal of the ensemble. The 5-minute wait time to ensure everyone enters at once created times for fellowship around non-musical topics. Within rehearsal, the texts of pieces carry the weight of building community through shared practice and shared text. Despite not knowing the person in the row behind you, in performing the same group activity together, there is a built-in sense of community. In the pandemic setting, one goal was added while another fell to the side. Due to not having live audiences, the focus on the concert became tremendously less. Because we recorded the performances in the same space as the rehearsal, there was no need to practice walking on and off stage, rebalance and retune the piano in the concert hall, and all of the other details during concert week. For some, the more relaxed, recorded atmosphere led to a more positive feeling of singing. Finally, the primary goal of the semester was to sing together and do so safely. In working with the university, 7th and James Baptist Church, and several graduate students, the ensemble could do just that. While attendance fluctuated due to illness, and we sang our concerts to no live audience, the joy of singing was reignited in students through the repertoire and well-designed rehearsals. Thank you.